Hi, this is Chris from the Stephanie Miller Show. Please enjoy this exclusive clip from Political Voices Network.
You and I were talking off air about just this really is so emotional and so even different than anything you've seen as someone Palestinian American who has relatives there. It's just this is different, and it is the politics are scrambled. There's so much emotion, and I truly wanted to understand it better, which is why I called you, because I this is the problem. I was saying with asking someone about the Middle East, and you're like, all right, hard break, we only have a minute. This has been going on for 11 billion years. But talk a little bit about you during the break. You were talking about having a young activist on your show last night, the fabulous Dino Badella show right here on Sirius XM Progress.
I had on Aidan Cohen Murphy. He's the founder of Gen Z for Change. He's a sophomore at Harvard. And we were just talking about what are the issues of great concern to young people. And he said, number one, that he wanted Biden to address in 2024 or now is ceasefire in Gaza. And it really took me back because I didn't expect that. And he was talking about he's Jewish. He's proud to be Jewish. But he said being Jewish and seeing what's going on in Gaza is heartbreaking. We need a ceasefire. Then it's about fossil fuels and reproductive freedom. But I didn't talk about being Palestinian or anything. I had never met the young guy before. We were just talking about the issues. And I also asked him about where do younger people learn about this? The New York Times poll 2 days ago, 3/4 of young people, 18 to 29, disapprove of the way Biden's handling it. He said TikTok is part of it. Part of it is that they see other things on Instagram, Facebook, and also the younger generation is far more diverse.
Yeah.
I was the Palestinian person in New Jersey growing up. Now there are tons of Dino Bidalas. There are. The younger generation.
You filled the quota, just the one guy.
Right. There's more diversity, so they learn about it very firsthand. There's alliances between other groups of color or other marginalized communities that was not there a long time ago. So you can block TikTok. Younger people are still going to learn about these things. They learn about it firsthand from stories. But what they learn from peer-to-peer on TikTok and social media is much more persuasive. He told me, we don't watch cable news.
Yeah.
He goes, me and my friends never, and they're very politically active. He goes, we don't watch cable news. They'll read articles and they'll go to social media.
Yeah. Well, and you were also saying even some conservative Democrats are urging Biden now for a ceasefire. And Biden, I think to his credit, is speaking out about, Israel's response and, trying to, Dean, I asked you this, honestly, I just don't know. I talked to everybody, right? Intelligence experts, military experts. We have Ben Glebon, who's your friend, who's Israeli American. You're obviously Palestinian American. It's just so heartbreaking. When you brought up a young person, I thought that was one of the things you and I talked about, that I was so heartbroken that a lot of these Israeli kids that were slaughtered on the 7th were the peaceniks. Yeah. They were the young people there, and now they're going, well, there's no more doves in Israel now after October 7th, Netanyahu's despicable and not for a two-state solution. So that's no partner for peace. But now, like you were saying in polling, Israelis don't want a two-state solution now after October 7th, and it's
dropped to its lowest support. It already had dropped below 50%. The highest support for a two-state solution, and there was polling going on both in the Palestinian territories and in Israel, more in the mid-2000s. You had around 55-60% of both people who said they would support some form of two-state solution. I don't think there's an appetite on either people right now for a two-state solution. At some point, something. As I said to you, Stephanie, anyone who's followed this conflict, you can go back 2 years ago and we're having the same conversation. Yeah. Go back 2 years before that. It is periods of violence and then calm for 2 years, and it's ignored. And what happens at time of ignored, that the Palestinians who live in Gaza live in their open-air prison. In the West Bank, where my family lives, there's more and more settlements built. The facts on the ground are changing, and no one's paying attention. And you have now an uptick in the last year in settler violence in the West Bank, where President Biden a few weeks ago said we're not going to give visas to these settlers who are not U.S. citizens who want to come here.
Good.
And finally, people are seeing that going on. Yeah. My grandmother's land in the West Bank decades ago was stolen by settlers. These people think that God told them it's their land, and my grandmother was not Jewish, she was Muslim. They took her land, not just hers. It wasn't like, I want your land. There's a whole bunch of Palestinians in the West Bank.
Dean, you can have my land. I just want you to know.
Right.
You can have it.
So that we'll do.
If it will help.
Peace. This is radio airtime for peace. Look, there are dead. The Israelis who were killed, the 1,200 plus, horrific. But let's not lose sight of the fact that over 7,000 Palestinian children are been killed already, and you can't even do the math. It makes no sense. There are 2 million people, or 300 million. If you multiply that by 150, you're talking about millions of children that would have been killed in America. So it doesn't even make sense, those numbers. It's just heartbreaking.
It is. You and I talked about, just because we did the math, we're obviously 330 million people. Israel's what, 9 million something?
9 million.
Yeah. So it is the equivalent of 40,000 Americans being beheaded, gang raped, killed, tortured in one day. In one day.
Right.
So you can imagine what we would say if the world told us, oh, now ceasefire and be proportional and whatever. And so I asked you, really, truly, because I'm an idiot, A, and B, I just, what does Israel do? Like, what should they do, in your opinion, just from your, like, what do you do when you have terrorists like Hamas that embed with civilians? Because I agree with you that this is heartbreaking, the amount of Palestinians that are dying. But I honestly want to know, what do you think Israelis should do? And also, what should Biden do, in your opinion?
Look, I'd rather speak for what I would like President Biden to do. I have no advice for Netanyahu, nor would he take any, because I'm Arab and he doesn't view us as fully developed human beings. Netanyahu, he does not. He's a racist and a bigot.
Yeah.
His administration has a guy named Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is anti-Christian and anti-Muslim. He is known in the Israeli papers as a Jewish supremacist, just like we have white supremacists. That's in the coalition. So Netanyahu, he's got to go. A new coalition will be formed, and perhaps then they'll actually have peace talks, some kind of lasting peace. How that's going to look, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I've long been about two states. I still would love to see Palestinians.
But what does Israel do militarily? How would you? What do you do?
Look, I'm not a military expert. What I can tell you is that what we're seeing, the world is seeing, and while America's tuned out a little bit, Europe and younger people have not.
Yeah.
And they're seeing images of a devastation. People can defend what happened in Gaza. That's your choice. But you can't deny the facts. You can't deny that over 60 to 70% of the population has been displaced by the Israeli military. That's collective punishment. That's a violation of international law. If you want to defend that, you can. Just don't debate the facts. That's the fact. Killing 7,000 children, 70% of 20%, 20,000 have been killed now. Just looked it up, NBC News.
Yeah.
70% are women and children. Even though those numbers are slightly inflated or deflated, we won't know.
Yeah.
That's what's happened. And people, if you want to defend that, that's your choice to defend that. But the numbers of Americans defending that are dropping. Quinnipiac poll yesterday showed American support for Israel overall is dropping.
Yeah.
So if you're a supporter of Israel, this is not helping you in the big picture. That's another big point. They've degraded the ability of Hamas. This has been almost a 2-month war going on. We can suffocate Hamas in terms of funding and make it really hard for them to get any money from Iran, through Qatar, through anyone. That's part of it. And then empower Palestinians there to be masters of their own destiny. Because this idea that, Hamas is hiding among Palestinian civilians, they can't leave. Right. This has been an open-air prison since 2007. It's not like, they summer in the first
I hear you. But what do you
fight in Gaza?
What do you make of them saying,
stuck there.
I know they haven't had an election in 17 years, but that if there was one, the experts are saying Hamas would win because the Palestinians don't feel like they have any choice. There's no other option. So isn't that part of...
I don't know, but those things, to me, I'd like to see a ceasefire. Then negotiations to get the hostages out.
Yeah.
And that should be part of it. The hostages should be released. The hostages should have never been taken. October 7th should have never happened. It's horrific. There's no but, there's no context. That was a horrific terrorist attack, period. And I want people to say the same thing when we talk about Palestinians dying. There's no context. There's no, those 7,000 children deserve to die. Or as Chris Hayes talked about 2 days on the show, an Israeli sniper killed 2 Christians in a church. The Vatican put out a statement denouncing it. Why that's not more headline news in America is beyond me. And that's the second time the Israeli military has targeted a church. They targeted a Catholic church with Justin Amash, the former congressman, Republican. His family was killed there. And that was a month and a half ago. And they'll say, well, Hamas was in the area. Well, Hamas is everywhere. That doesn't justify you doing that.
Yeah.
And people have lost, I think there's been a loss of morality, and it's been heartbreaking. This war has gone on longer than any of these conflicts, by the way, too.
Yeah.
The worst one was 2015. That was about 50 days.
Yeah.
We are now on the verge of 80 days of a war here.
Yeah. No, you were saying, and, obviously know the history a lot better than I do, that this is the worst you've ever seen it. I mean, it's...
By far.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what just feels so hopeless and sad to me is just, as you say, I agree with everything you say about Netanyahu, and...
Horrible.
And yeah, and it's all connected, because even Israelis think that is his, whatever, supporting his violent Israeli settlers on the West Bank. He's the one. I mean, can you imagine that this happened on his his whole rationale for being alive is to keep Israelis secure. He had the intelligence for a year and missed it, and took 8 hours while people were being beheaded and gang raped. It just the whole thing is.
No one.
Yeah.
That's another issue that they're going to have to go through in Israel. And they're going to ask a lot of questions about that, and that'll be after the fact. Look, they're negotiating right now, literally in the UN, not far from where I live, to try to have a UN Security Council resolution that the U.S. won't veto, which means Israel is being consulted to have some kind of terms for a pause or a longer-term ceasefire. At some point, there'll be a ceasefire, right?
Yeah.
We all know that.
Yeah.
The question is what happens after that. And I would submit nothing's going to happen. There's not going to be an establishment of a Palestinian state. There'll be some humanitarian aid, and then the world will forget about it when it's calm. And the next time we'll have these conversations in 2 years when there's another spike in violence.
Yeah.
That I've been having these all my life. This is all that happens. This is the soundtrack of my life.
And Dean, people I love personally, like you, and like Ben Glebe, who's an Israel. I understand your emotion and passion, both of you, around this, and having family over there, and I was saying I have a very dear friend, one of my best friends here, who's Jewish and not at all political and not really religious. But unfortunately, October 7th, I think, did change things. I've never seen. I'm like, he's just like,
And I have
make Hamas, decimate them because it just did.
And I have a really good friend who's from Lebanon who hasn't been political a day in his life, and all of a sudden he started posting about genocide Joe Biden. It's done something to people.
Yeah. Well, and you have Bernie.
You
have Bernie saying you can't have
Exactly.
you can't have a ceasefire while Hamas is in charge,
Right.
and then you have. It's the politics is it's sort of as scrambled as everyone's emotions about all this. I think, Dean. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to do something odd. I'm going to quote an Israeli general, Moshe Dayan, who said, "If you want peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies."
Yeah.
So
Yep.
the reality is they have no choice but to talk. The reality is both Israelis and Palestinians, and there's almost, just so people know, we go through history, 1947, 1948, 67, 73. I can go through all that. That means nothing. Right now, there's almost an equal number of Arabs, of Christians and Muslims, and Israeli Jews living in that, from the river to the sea, together. Almost the same number, about 9 million to about 8 million. Nobody is driving anyone out. No one's driving anyone to the ocean, to the sea. No one's ethnically cleansing them. No one's going to exterminate them. That's not going to happen. They're going to have to live together. Yeah. And the question is, what form will that take? Will it be two states? Will it be a binational state? Will it be a federation? Will it be an EU? Or will it be generations of Palestinians living under occupation and oppression, no fundamental rights, and spikes of violence, then calm, violence and calm? Those are the options. Like, we've got to come to some lasting just peace, or we live through this and have this conversation every 2 years.
There it is, my first drink of the day, ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic. Many of you know my story. I stopped drinking wine for 3 years during COVID, during the lockdown as part of a health reset. Now I drink wine in moderation, but this is an amazing new product. I've always believed in probiotics. And ZBiotics, check this out. You drink just one of these. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. I am using this and I feel great in the morning. I don't have to worry if I have an extra glass of wine. I still feel great in the morning. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. I've always had acid reflux problems. It is this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. All I know is it works. It is ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol Probiotic. Go to zbiotics.com/politicalvoices or scan the QR code on the screen right now.